The city hummed like a giant, overheated machine, its summer breath thick and heavy with exhaust and dust. Anya felt smaller than ever against its towering, glass-paneled sides, just one more tired person in the crowd. The sun, reflecting off a million windows, was a relentless, blinding force. She had been on her feet since 5 that morning, first at the campus library shelving books, then rushing to a downtown coffee shop to serve lattes and pastries with a forced smile. Now all she wanted was the blessed relief of the bus's air conditioning and the shaky ride home. But the bus was late. Of course it was late. Anya leaned against the hot plexiglass of the shelter, her backpack heavy with textbooks, feeling the gritty sweat on her skin. Each passing car sent a new wave of heat washing over her. The sounds of the city, the blaring horns, the jackhammer in the distance, the chatter of strangers, began to blur into a single, overwhelming drone. She closed her eyes for just a second, trying to find a center of calm, but the world tilted precariously. A strange, cold feeling prickled at the back of her neck, a shocking contrast to the oppressive heat. Her vision started to tunnel, the bright daylight narrowing to a tiny, shrinking pinprick at the end of a long, dark corridor. The weight of her backpack suddenly felt like a boulder pulling her down. She tried to reach for the bench, her fingers brushing against the sun-warmed metal, but her muscles had turned to water. There was no pain, only a terrifying, floaty detachment as the solid ground seemed to vanish from beneath her feet. The world went soft, then silent, then black. The sleek, black car glided through the traffic, a cool oasis of leather and chilled air. Inside, Leo drummed his fingers lightly on the steering wheel, his mind already on the tedious board meeting he was late for. His father's voice still echoed in his head, a lecture about responsibility and legacy. He glanced out the window, his gaze skimming over the crowd of ordinary people living ordinary lives, a world away from his own gilded cage of expectations. And then he saw her. A young woman, pale as a ghost, her eyes fluttering closed as her legs simply gave out. She crumpled to the hot pavement like a fallen leaf. Without a second thought, Leo swerved the car to the curb, ignoring the angry honk from a taxi behind him. He threw the door open and was at her side in an instant, kneeling on the rough concrete. "Hey, can you hear me?" he said, his voice firm but laced with a concern that surprised even him. He gently slipped a hand behind her head, cushioning it from the hard ground. Her skin was clammy to the touch. People on the sidewalk slowed to stare but kept walking, a river parting around a stone. Leo ignored them, his focus entirely on the unconscious girl. He remembered a first aid course from years ago. He carefully loosened the scarf around her neck. "Someone call an ambulance," he called out, though he wasn't sure if anyone was listening. Her eyelashes fluttered. A soft, confused moan escaped her lips. Slowly, her eyes opened, dazed and unfocused, looking up at the handsome, worried face hovering above her. She tried to sit up, a wave of embarrassment washing over the dizziness. "Oh, I'm okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I just got too hot." "Don't try to move yet," Leo said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He jogged back to his car and returned with an expensive bottle of mineral water, condensation beating on the glass. "Here's small sips." He held it to her lips and she drank gratefully, the cold liquid feeling like a miracle. His fingers brushed against her chin, and a jolt, strange and unexpected, passed between them. He helped her to her feet, his arm a strong, steady support around her shoulders as her legs wobbled. She was light, he noticed, and she smelled like coffee and sunshine. "Thank you," she mumbled, unable to meet his eyes. She was painfully aware of her old jeans and worn-out sneakers next to his obviously tailored suit and shoes that probably cost more than her rent. "I'm so sorry. I'm Anya." "Leo," he said. "And don't be sorry. Let's get you out of this sun." He guided her to the passenger seat of his car, the leather seats cool and embracing. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud, shutting out the noise and heat of the city. The silence inside was profound. Anya sank into the seat, utterly mortified but also deeply relieved. She'd never been in a car so quiet and smooth. "Where do you live, Anya?" "I'll drive you home," Leo said, pulling back into the traffic. The question was simple, but the act felt intensely personal. As she gave him directions to her modest apartment building on the other side of the city, they began to talk. It was stilted at first, but soon the words came easier. He learned about her double shifts, her dream of becoming a teacher, her fierce independence. She learned that behind the wealth and the sharp suit was a man who listened intently, whose eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, a real, genuine smile, not the polished one he'd first given her. The journey across town felt both too short and strangely eternal. When he pulled up in front of her building, a place that looked even shabbier next to his pristine vehicle, a new wave of awkwardness hit her. "Thank you, Leo. Really. For everything." He simply nodded, his gaze thoughtful as he watched her. "Take care of yourself, Anya." She got out of the car and walked inside without looking back, her heart beating a rhythm that had nothing to do with her fainting spell. Leo sat there for a long moment, watching the door she disappeared through, the image of her pale, determined face etched in his mind. The board meeting, his father's demands, his entire planned-out life suddenly felt distant and unimportant. All he could think about was a girl named Anya who worked too hard and had the most honest eyes he had ever seen. The deal he was racing to had vanished from his thoughts, replaced by the beginning of a far more dangerous and intriguing proposition. The days that followed Anya's collapse on the sidewalk folded into one another, a blur of relentless routine and a low humming anxiety about money. The memory of that day, of the sharp smell of hot pavement and the cool relief of the car's interior, of Leo's concerned face, felt like a strange dream, a brief interruption in the monochrome reality of her life. She was back to her 2 jobs, the weight of her textbooks a constant reminder of a future she was tirelessly building brick by brick. Yet, sometimes in the quiet moment before sleep, she would find her thoughts drifting back to the solid feel of his arm around her shoulders, the quiet confidence in his voice. She would shake her head, a small, sad smile touching her lips. Men like Leo existed in a different universe, one where problems were solved with a signed check and a phone call, not with double shifts and ration meals. Meanwhile, in his corner office high above the city, Leo found his own focus fractured. Spreadsheets and contract proposals lay forgotten on his desk. His father, a man of imposing stature and even more imposing expectations named Silas, had just left after another lecture. The topic, as always, was the future, specifically the merger, not of companies but of families. Silas had arranged for Leo to marry Eva, the daughter of a rival business magnate. It was a cold, clinical transaction designed to consolidate power and wealth, a move straight out of his father's playbook. Leo had always known this day would come, but facing it now filled him with a cold, hard knot of resistance. The thought of a life, a marriage, built on such a barren foundation felt like a prison sentence. Eva was beautiful, polished, and as calculating as her father. She would be the perfect corporate wife, and the idea made his skin crawl. It was during this simmering rebellion that the image of Anya returned to him, not as a damsel in distress, but as a solution. She was the antithesis of everything his father wanted. She was real, unpolished, and her world was built on effort, not entitlement. A wild, audacious plan began to form in his mind, a plan so reckless it almost made him laugh. It was a business proposition of his own design. He would offer her a deal, a contract that would solve both their problems. He would get a wife of his own choosing, a shield against his father's demands, and she would get the financial security to chase her dreams without breaking her back. It was clean, logical, and utterly insane. He found her 3 days later. He didn't call, that would have given her a chance to refuse. Instead, he let a casual inquiry to the manager of the coffee shop reveal her schedule. He arrived just as her shift was ending, the setting sun casting long shadows through the large windows. He saw her before she saw him, wiping down a table with a tired but thorough motion, her hair escaping the loose ponytail she wore. She looked up as the bell on the door chimed, and her eyes widened in shock, the cloth freezing in her hand. For a moment she looked like she might faint again. "Leo?" she said, her voice a mixture of confusion and something else, nervousness perhaps. "Anya, do you have a moment?" "I'd like to talk," he said, his voice calm, belying the sheer madness of his mission. Her break was in 5 minutes, she told him, her eyes never leaving his face. He waited at a small corner table while she finished her closing duties, the other employees casting curious glances his way. He was painfully out of place in his tailored suit, an exotic bird that had landed in a homely coop. When she finally sat down across from him, clutching a glass of water, the air between them crackled with unspoken questions. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid it out for her with the same clarity he would use for a business merger. He told her about his father's plan, about Eva, about the gilded cage he was expected to willingly enter. He saw her flinch slightly at the other woman's name, a flicker of something he couldn't identify in her eyes. Then he presented his offer. His proposal. The words hung in the air between them, absurd and impossible. Marriage. A business arrangement. A year, perhaps 2 of her life. In exchange, all her financial burdens would vanish. Her tuition paid in full. Her rent covered. A generous allowance that would allow her to quit her jobs and focus entirely on her studies. She would want for nothing. Anya stared at him as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. Her first reaction was a sharp, disbelieving laugh that died in her throat when she saw he was completely serious. "You're crazy," she whispered, her face pale. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said, his gaze intense. "I know you're strong. I know you're determined. And I know you're in a situation that is slowly draining the life from you. I'm offering you a way out. We both get something we need." He was offering her a key. The key to every lock that had ever held her back. The image of her cramped apartment, the constant knot of worry in her stomach about next month's rent, the exhausting cycle of work and study that left no room for simply living, it all flashed before her eyes. She could be free of it. All of it. She could actually enjoy her college years. She could sleep. The temptation was a physical ache, a siren song so powerful it threatened to sweep away every ounce of her reason. But it was a marriage. A sham. A lie they would have to live every day. She would have to pretend for his family, for the world. She would have to live with him. The thought sent a strange, unwelcome thrill through her, followed immediately by a wave of fear. This was a transaction, she reminded herself. A business deal. There would be no emotion. He had made that perfectly clear. He was buying her presence, her cooperation. He wasn't offering his heart. She looked down at her hands, red and slightly rough from washing dishes and handling cleaning chemicals. She thought of the future she was fighting for, a future that seemed so distant and fragile. Leo's offer was a shortcut, a jetpack strapped to her back. It was also a potential disaster, a leap into the unknown with a man who was practically a stranger. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Leo waited, his own heart hammering in his chest. He had never needed anyone to say yes before. He realized with a start that he desperately needed her to say yes. Finally, Anya looked up. Her eyes were clear, though shadowed with the weight of the decision. There was a new resolve in them, a steel that he hadn't seen before. She took a deep, shaky breath. "Okay," she said, the word barely more than a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the quiet cafe. "Okay, Leo. I'll do it." The transition from Anya's small, cluttered apartment to Leo's vast, minimalist penthouse was less like moving and more like being teleported to another planet. The air here didn't smell of old building and neighboring cooking. It was filtered, scentless and cool. The silence was the most unnerving part. In her old life, silence was a rare commodity, always filled with the hum of traffic, pipes groaning in the walls, or the muffled sounds of nearby lives. Here, the silence was deep and absolute, a heavy blanket that seemed to absorb sound itself. Her footsteps on the polished concrete floors echoed like gunshots, making her wince and tread lightly. Leo had been true to his word. He had given her a suite of rooms, a bedroom, a private sitting room, and a bathroom larger than her entire previous apartment, all decorated in shades of gray and beige, beautiful and cold, like a museum exhibit. It was clear this wing of the penthouse was designed for guests, for temporary occupants. It felt nothing like a home. Their first week under the same roof was a masterclass in awkward politeness. They were two satellites orbiting the same sun but on vastly different paths, occasionally passing in the kitchen or the grand living area with its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city like a sparkling diorama. Conversations were stilted, revolving around schedules and logistics. "The housekeeper comes on Tuesdays. I have a dinner with my father tonight, you don't need to attend. The car is available if you need to go to campus." They ate meals together sometimes, seated at opposite ends of a table long enough to land a small aircraft, the clink of cutlery against fine china the only sound. Anya felt like an imposter, a visitor who had overstayed her welcome in a world where she didn't belong. She missed the noisy, chaotic warmth of her old life fiercely, even as she appreciated the profound relief of her vanished financial pressures. The change began, as it often does, with a crack in the routine. Leo had been working late, buried in the fallout of his defiant choice, fending off his father's icy displeasure. One night he came home well past midnight, his shoulders tense, his face drawn with fatigue. The penthouse was dark except for a soft, warm glow emanating from the living room. He found Anya curled on the vast sofa, buried under a mountain of textbooks and highlighted notes, a single lamp casting a golden pool of light around her. She was asleep, her head pillowed on a dense volume of educational theory, her hand still loosely holding a pen. He stood there for a long moment, watching her. She looked younger in sleep, the constant worry line between her brows smoothed away. In this silent, sterile space she was an island of quiet, earnest effort. He noticed the title of the book she was reading, the meticulous notes in the margins. This wasn't a performance. This was her real life, her real passion, and she had brought it into his cold, empty house. A strange feeling, something warm and protective, stirred in his chest. He didn't wake her. Instead, he found a blanket from a linen closet and draped it gently over her, careful not to disturb her. He turned off the lamp and left her to sleep in the moonlight streaming through the windows. The next evening he came home earlier. He found her in the kitchen, attempting to use the intimidating professional-grade stove. She was trying to make a simple pasta dish, looking utterly bewildered by the array of controls. He hesitated, then walked in. "Here," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Let me show you. This thing is needlessly complicated." He guided her through the controls, their arms brushing lightly. They ended up cooking together, a simple, messy affair that was the most human thing that had happened in that kitchen in years. They ate at the kitchen island, side by side, instead of the formal dining table. They talked. Not about schedules or deals, but about her classes, her dream of teaching children, his complicated relationship with his father, his own stifled dream of being an architect instead of a corporate heir. The dam had broken. After that, the careful distance between them began to erode. He started asking about her day. She began waiting up for him if he worked late, often with a cup of tea ready. They discovered a shared love for old black and white movies and began a nightly ritual of watching one together on the big screen in the media room, arguing playfully about which classic actor was the best. The giant house began to feel smaller, the silence now filled with the easy cadence of their conversations and shared laughter. The careful, businesslike arrangement was slowly being painted over with something real, something warm and unpredictable. The attraction, once a theoretical concept buried under the terms of their contract, began to simmer just beneath the surface of every glance, every accidental touch. One night they were on the sofa after a movie, the credits rolling. They were discussing the film, their debate lively and full of laughter. Anya was gesturing with her hands to make a point, and Leo was watching her, not the screen, a soft smile on his face. He was captivated by the light in her eyes, the passion in her voice. She turned to him, still laughing at something he said, and their eyes met. The laughter died on her lips. The air in the room changed, grew thick and charged. The space between them on the sofa, which had once felt like a mile, now felt like inches. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Leo reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, a whisper of a touch that sent a shiver through her entire body. Her breath hitched. This was no longer part of the deal. This was something else entirely. He leaned in, his eyes searching hers for permission. She didn't move, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. And then he closed the distance. The kiss was gentle at first, a soft, questioning brush of his lips against hers. It was an exploration, a silent question. And her answer was to lean into him, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, slow and sweet, tasting of trust and discovery and a longing neither had dared to name. It was nothing like the cold, transactional agreement they had signed. It was everything a first kiss should be, a beginning, a promise, a silent acknowledgement that their carefully constructed world of business had just been irrevocably, beautifully blown apart. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, they just looked at each other, the unspoken truth hanging in the air between them. The deal was off. Something real had begun. The kiss changed everything. It was as if a single silent switch had been flipped, transforming the entire atmosphere of the penthouse. The careful, polite distance they had maintained evaporated overnight, replaced by a new, thrilling and slightly terrifying closeness. The next morning, the air was thick with unspoken words and stolen glances across the breakfast island. Where before their interactions were scheduled and deliberate, now they were drawn together by a force that felt both inevitable and electric. The memory of the kiss lingered between them, a shared secret that made Anya's cheeks flush and caused Leo to lose his train of thought mid-sentence while reviewing a contract. Leo was the first to break the new, charged silence. "Forget the deal," he said, his voice low and serious, his breakfast forgotten. He came around the island to stand before her, taking her hands in his. It wasn't part of the agreement. I don't want it to be." His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a simple touch that sent a jolt straight to her core. "I want to take you on a date. A real one. No pretending. Just you and me." Anya's heart soared. She simply nodded, a genuine radiant smile breaking across her face that made Leo's breath catch in his throat. That smile was worth more to him than any business acquisition. The date was nothing like the formal, stifling events he was accustomed to. He didn't take her to a five-star restaurant swarming with paparazzi. Instead, he took her to a small, family-owned Italian place tucked away on a cobblestone street, a place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old wine bottles. He held her hand across the table, his thumb tracing circles on her skin as they talked for hours. They shared a single dessert, feeding each other bites of tiramisu, laughing like teenagers. For the first time, Anya saw Leo not as the billionaire's son, but as a man, funny, surprisingly vulnerable, and utterly captivating. He looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world, and in that moment she felt like she was. Back at the penthouse, the energy was different. The vast space no longer felt cold and impersonal, it felt charged with possibility. They were in the living room and a slow, soulful song came through the hidden speakers. Without a word, Leo stood and offered her his hand. "Dance with me," he said, his voice a soft murmur. There was no music loud enough to warrant it, just the faint melody and the sound of their own breathing. She went into his arms willingly and he pulled her close, one hand resting on the small of her back, the other holding her hand against his chest. They swayed together, not really dancing, just moving in a slow, intimate circle. Her head found its natural resting place against his shoulder, and she could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. His breath was warm against her hair. It was the most romantic moment of her life, a silent communion of two souls sinking together. He leaned back slightly, just enough to look down into her eyes. The playfulness was gone, replaced by a smoldering intensity that made her knees feel weak. The air between them grew hot, the space shrinking until there was nothing but the magnetic pole drawing them together. This time when he kissed her, it was not a question. It was a claiming. It was deep and hungry, full of all the pent-up longing and desire they had both tried so hard to deny. It was a kiss that spoke of more. It was a door swinging open, an invitation. His hands slid from her back, down her sides, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. Her own hands crept up, tangling in the soft hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer, answering his hunger with her own. The careful control he always exhibited was gone, shattered by the force of what he felt for her. Breathing became ragged, clothes felt like obstacles. The world outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sparkling city, ceased to exist. There was only the feel of his skin under her fingertips as she fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, only the sound of his low groan as her hands explored the hard planes of his chest. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and carried her not to her guest wing but to his own room, a space that was all dark wood, deep blues, and him. What followed was a slow, delicious unraveling. There was no more pretense, no more deal. There was only sensation and emotion intertwined. The touch of his hands was worshipful, learning the landscape of her body as if it were sacred ground. Every sigh, every whisper of his name against her skin was a confession. The initial nervousness she felt melted away under the heat of his gaze, replaced by a powerful, burgeoning confidence in the way he responded to her touch, to the way he looked at her. It was a discovery not just of each other's bodies, but of a profound and shocking intimacy that went far beyond the physical. It was giving and taking, a silent language of pleasure and trust that cemented them together. It was the final, irrevocable end of their business arrangement and the breathtaking beginning of everything real. Later, tangled in his sheets, wrapped in his arms with the moon casting silver stripes across the bed, she knew. This was no contract. This was love. The golden period that followed was a world unto itself, a private universe Anya and Leo built within the walls of the penthouse. They existed in a blissful bubble, discovering the intricate map of each other's hearts. Mornings were no longer silent affairs but shared over coffee, with Leo reading the financial news and Anya her textbooks, their feet tangled together under the table. Evenings were spent talking for hours, conversations that spiraled from silly childhood memories to their deepest fears and grandest dreams. The vast, cold apartment was now filled with evidence of their shared life. One of Anya's cozy sweaters thrown over the back of his minimalist sofa, his expensive pen left on a stack of her graded papers. The physical intimacy they had discovered became a language all its own, a constant, quiet conversation of lingering touches, secret smiles, and nights spent exploring a passion that burned brighter with each passing day. He loved her with a focus that made her feel like the center of his universe, and she loved him with a fierceness that healed the lonely, pressured boy he used to be. They had found a forever they hadn't even known to look for. Inevitably, the outside world demanded entry. The summons came not as a request but as a command. Silas, Leo's father, required their presence at the family estate, a cold, imposing manor that felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home. The air in the grand study was frigid enough to form ice. Silas, a man carved from granite and ambition, did not rise to greet them. His eyes, the same shade as Leo's but devoid of their warmth, swept over Anya with a dismissive glance that made her feel like an insect under a microscope. He laid it out with cold, brutal efficiency. He knew. He had known for weeks. His network of informants had provided him with every detail of their little charade. He spoke of Anya not by name but as the girl, a temporary obstacle in his meticulously laid plans. His ultimatum was simple and devastating. Leo was to end this foolishness immediately, file for an annulment, and proceed with the engagement to Eva. If he refused, the consequences would be absolute. He would be cut off, from the company, from the family fortune, from everything that bore the family name. He would be nothing. The words hung in the opulent room, a death sentence for their fragile new happiness. Anya felt her heart fracture, the beautiful bubble they had lived in popping with a silent, painful scream. This was what she had feared from the beginning. She had known her world could not coexist with his. She braced herself for Leo's difficult, painful, but ultimately understandable choice. She loved him enough to let him go. But Leo did not hesitate. He did not even look at his father. He looked at Anya. He saw the fear in her eyes, the resignation already settling on her features, and his own resolve solidified into something unbreakable. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers tightly with hers, a silent promise. Then he turned to the man who had controlled every aspect of his life. "No," Leo said, his voice quiet but clear, ringing with a finality that shocked the very air in the room. It was a single syllable Silas was utterly unprepared for. "You would choose this, nobody?" Silas hissed, his composure cracking for the first time, revealing the fury beneath. "You would throw away your legacy for a girl you picked up off the street?" "You don't understand," Leo replied, his gaze never wavering. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing my real legacy. It's not the company. It's not the money. It's her." He squeezed Anya's hand. "She is worth more than any of it. If your love for me, if this family, is conditional on me living a lie, then it's not love and it's not a family I want any part of. I choose her. I will always choose her." It was Anya's turn. She stepped forward, her initial fear burned away by the ferocity of Leo's love, replaced by a courage she didn't know she possessed. She looked Silas directly in his cold eyes. "Our marriage might have started as a deal," she said, her voice steady, strong. "But it isn't one anymore. What we have is real. It's stronger than your money and your threats. You can't buy it and you can't break it." The defiance in their united front, the raw, palpable truth of their love, was a force Silas had no strategy to combat. He could fight business rivals, he could manipulate markets, but he had no weapon against this. He saw the man his son had become, strong, principled, and fiercely protective of the woman beside him. He saw the unshakable resolve in the girl's eyes. For the first time in his life, Silas was defeated. He said nothing. He simply turned his chair away, staring out the window at the manicured lawns of his gilded cage, a king suddenly dethroned by the one thing he could never control, true love. Leo led Anya from the house, and they didn't stop walking until they were back in their car, back in their world. They drove in a silence filled not with tension, but with overwhelming relief and a soaring, triumphant joy. They were free. Truly, completely free. The epilogue of their story was not written in a corporate boardroom or a cold manor, but in a sun-drenched living room of a new home, a place they had chosen together, a place that was theirs. It was smaller than the penthouse but infinitely warmer, filled with the books, the laughter, and the love they had built. Leo, with Anya's unwavering support, had started his own architecture firm, building his own legacy from the ground up, one based on passion, not pressure. Anya, her degrees proudly hung on the wall, was now a teacher, pouring the kindness and strength she had always possessed into a classroom of her own. On a quiet evening, with the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Leo found Anya curled on their sofa, reading. He sat beside her, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her hair. It was a kiss that held a lifetime of promises, of partnership, of passion, of a love that had been tested and had emerged unbreakable. They had journeyed from a desperate deal on a cafe table to this, a forever built on the most solid foundation of all. They had chosen each other, and in that choice they had found everything. Their extraordinary journey from a fainting spell on a busy sidewalk to a love that conquered every obstacle proves that the most beautiful stories often begin in the most unexpected ways. If you were captivated by Anya and Leo's story, by their struggle and their triumphant love, then you won't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe now to ensure you never miss a single chapter of the breathtaking romances waiting to be told.